He was left for dead at the highest peak on Earth, but a vision gave him the will to live. Our number 2 incredible survival story is Disaster on Mount Everest.
This is not a dream. This is really real.
Beck Weathers' saga began in the mid-1980s when the Dallas pathologist picked up a new hobby.
He climbed to escape. He suffered from a pretty severe depression and found that one of the only ways to tame that depression was to be on a mountain.
Weathers set his sights on the famed 7 Summits quest. His goal was to scale the highest mountain on each of the 7 continents. In 1996, with 6 summits behind him, Weathers faced his final challenge, Mount Everest, the world's tallest peak.
Climbing Everest is the ultimate man versus nature challenge, and only about 2,500 people have ever climbed Everest, and more than 200 have died trying to climb it.
In April 1996, Weathers and a group of other mountaineers set out on the arduous 5-week journey to the Mammoth Peak. But their expedition turned out to be the deadliest in Everest history.
Beck Weathers was involved in what was basically the worst disaster since Sir Edmund Hillary summited.
33 days into their climb, as the team neared the summit, 54-year-old Weathers was paralyzed by a debilitating condition.
Beck was struck by temporary blindness, and this was because he had had corrective eye surgery before and also because of the high altitude.
Weathers was forced to remain below the summit, while the rest of his group triumphantly climbed to the peak.
Weathers was left somewhere between the high camp and the summit, which basically this area is considered the death zone.
Around 26,000 feet, human beings are definitely not meant to survive. Your body can't digest food, so certain systems in your body start to shut down.
While Weathers waited, a major blizzard hit Mount Everest. Hurricane-force winds lashed the face of the mountain.
The only thing I can remember at the time was knowing that I had to stay awake and keep moving and generating heat, because if I slipped away, I might not wake up.
The 8 mountaineers who made it to the peak of Everest perished in the storm. Meanwhile, below, Weathers was alone and stranded. During the 8-hour storm, the doctor slipped into a hypothermic coma. After the storm passed, rescuers found Weathers, but determined he was too far gone to save.
Sort of an unwritten rule that, especially in the death zone, if a climber runs into trouble, if they can't be encouraged to move on their own, just basically try to make them comfortable and ease their passing.
The climbers came down and they thought that the appropriate thing to do was to call his wife. They radioed her and told her that her husband was dead.
But Weathers wasn't dead. As the climber faded in and out of consciousness, he had a vision of his wife and children. Weathers knew he had to move fast if he ever hoped to see them again.
Miraculously, he opened his eyes. He was able to stand up.
He had a sense of where the camps were. We could judge that partly on where the wind was coming from, because he knew where the predominant winds were.
Weathers stunned his fellow climbers when he arrived at the upper camp still alive.
He was in a terrible condition when he reached high base camp.
They described his skin on his hands and his face as looking like porcelain, like it would break if they touched it.
Beck's wife, Peach, was notified, and from home she arranged for a rescue helicopter.
At the time, this was the highest altitude helicopter rescue ever attempted.
Weathers was flown to safety, but he wasn't out of danger yet.
He was suffering from very severe frostbite on his face, his nose, his hands were frozen completely. He had frostbite in his feet as well.
Weathers returned to Texas. Doctors were forced to amputate his lower right arm and the fingers on his left hand. Weathers' nose was destroyed by frostbite and needed to be reconstructed.
The nose is a very difficult thing to replace. What the surgeons ended up doing was harvesting cartilage from his ear and then using a vascular supply of basically his forehead in order to help this cartilage grow and replace the nose that he used to have.
Weathers' close call on the mountain led to some soul-searching at home.
Would I like to have my hands back? Sure. Would I like to have my hands back enough to go back to who I was? No.
Everest completely changed his outlook on life and actually saved his marriage, and he was able to realize what really matters in this world.
I am a vastly happier person and much more at peace than I've ever been in my life.
The doctor shared his revelations in his book, Left for Dead.
The chances of surviving what Beck Weathers went through, virtually 0. No one lives through that. There is a tiny fraction tiny number of cases that defy all explanation. There really is no scientific reason that he should be here alive today. It's a mystery. Beckweather's story is instructive for the rest of us. We're never going to end up in the death zone on Mount Everest, but his story tells us a number of things about who survives, and he describes how the power of that connection to his family got him onto his feet and got him walking down that mountain to live and to survive. So in terms of motivation, the power of human bonds and attachments, those can lead people to do incredible things.
When we return, a plane crash, 16 survivors, and a shocking decision.